and welcome back to my channel where I'm going to cover the Bard's College of Creation class specialization from Tasha's Guide to Everything, providing a brief description of the subclass, as well as explain and set up the various features gained. No matter which realm your D&D campaign is in, according to legend, there existed a time before the first stars and moons were even born. This time was known as the period of the Song, specifically the Song of Creation. In the various realms that exist today, be it Eberron, Faerun, or any of the other worlds that fall within the D&D structure, this song is still present for those who can hear it. This song has been an inspiration behind this particular subclass, the College of Creation, and its bards learn how to listen to that song and bend it a little to their will, or at the very least learn how to ask it to do things. There is no restriction as to who can take or choose this subclass for their character. However, generally the longer-lived races, those more connected to magic and creation, will become bards within this college, such as dwarves, gnomes, even dragonborn who actually revere the song. As per the other bard videos, this video will focus strictly on the subclass, so if you need to understand how to set up the base bard, please click the links in the description below where I go into detail on how to create and level a base bard class. Bards get to choose their class specialization starting at level 3, and generally will gain their first feature as soon as the level subclass has been applied. So let's do that, and then get into the first feature. In this particular case, all I need to do is grab the Bard class here for the sheet, the link from it, and then drop it into place, and we will get a prompt of our class specialization. In this case, I want College of Creation. The first feature is called the Mote of Potential, and it allows your character to add a bit of a kick to the Bardic Inspiration dice depending on the type of role the inspired character or creature chooses to use it on. When the Bard gives another creature a Bardic Inspiration die, they can also add a Mote of Magic that will float around that creature's head until they choose to actually use the bonus. The Mote is not tangible, and it is invulnerable to attack or damage, and it is generally used to indicate that a character has been given inspiration, though the form of the mote is entirely up to the bard who cast it. For example, you could choose to make it a little sphere, or the shape of a pixie, or any other kind of signature that would denote that it is your mote that you have given to somebody else. So let's go over what the mote will actually do, depending on the different option chosen. When the inspired character uses the bonus die for an ability check, that character can roll the dice twice and select which roll they want to take. This is a direct result of the mote itself, giving the character that extra roll. Any of the skill checks can benefit from this, so it will be a bit tricky to manage within Fantasy Grounds, but it can be done. The first thing we'll want to do is ensure that we add the Mote of Potential to our Actions tab. And I'm going to create a group called College of Creation. There we go, and that's going to drop it down to here. I'm going to temporarily ignore that this exists. In fact, I suspect it will come into play here. But what I do want to do is grant an additional dice roll that a character can actually go through and run. And really all I'm going to do is double up on exactly what we've done here, except it's going to be restricted to checks. So I'm going to create a new action. It's going to be an effect. And I'm going to call this Mote of Potential. We're going to use the check keyword. And this actually should be a semicolon, not a colon. And it's going to be 1d6. It is going to last for the duration of the Bardic Inspiration point, which is 10 minutes, and it will expire on the next roll. And that essentially is how it will be configured. How it's going to get used is an entirely different matter. So I've set up the combat tracker where the Bard has the action. I'm going to give the ape a Bardic Inspiration point. And at the same time, I'm going to throw a mote over them for their ability checks for now. Now, you got to admit, this is going to be a bit of an issue because the player themselves, in this case the ape, gets to choose how they actually apply the mote. So there's going to be a little bit of coordination between you and the player as to when you're going to give them the mote. You're going to indicate to the DM that you've given them a mote, and then you're going to coordinate when you actually apply the mote to their character so that they can take advantage of the roll. Generally, though, you're not doing an ability check during combat, which means it's relatively safe to drop onto them. However, sometimes you are. But let's see how this plays out. I'm now going to move the ape to have the action token, if you will, or set up the ape to have the action token. And then I'm going to make that ape roll a strength check. And you will see that there will be 1d20 and 2d6 that are rolled. One for the inspiration die that's no longer there, and one for the mote. And we can see that here, that both have expired. Their total ability score was only 15, even with the extra dice. But it was probably sufficient enough to pass most checks. And that's how it's essentially going to work. But let's go ahead and set up the rest of these features to see if it's going to trigger any adjustment that we need to do here. And then we'll see if there's any additional coordination that has to come into play. In relation to attack rolls, when the inspired creature decides to make use of the inspiration die to supplement their attack roll, the mote itself will shatter, forcing that target of the inspired creature and any other creature within 5 feet of that target to make a Constitution saving throw or suffer thunder damage of the same amount as the die roll. The only restriction is that your character has to be able to see the other targets around that creature in order for you to be able to choose them as an affected creature as a recipient of having to make the Constitution saving throw and thereby suffer thunder damage if they fail. There is, however, going to be manual intervention required in order for this to function. The first thing we're going to want to do, though, is preload a damage element, if you will, or action to the overall feature that we want to set this up as. We want to make sure that we also set the damage type to thunder. Now all we will need is the actual die roll that will come into play. Well, on our combat tracker, I have this ape set up with the active turn. Let's say that the bard had applied the bardic inspiration die to the ape in their previous round, and now it's the ape's turn, and they're in the process of making use of this during their attack roll. I'm going to do that on the DM screen, and you should see the results of that die roll here. So we can see that we had rolled an initial 8, but the actual die roll came up as a 5, meaning that the inspiration die is granting 5 additional points to the overall roll total. That means you, as the bard, have to add 5 to this damage roll. Now let's say that when the ape attacked the succubus, the 3 creatures that happen to be near that succubus are the bugbear and these 2 flying swords. Well, you as the bard could then go along and target all 3 of these particular creatures, and you can do it outside of your turn. You don't have to have the action token, if you will, to be able to do this, and then simply click the damage, and it will apply that damage to each of these creatures. The only thing you have to remember is to modify this value to be equal to the die roll that you see in relation to the bardic inspiration die, and it will always be this purple die. As for the saving throw, when a creature uses their bardic inspiration die to complement their saving throw to give them a bigger total, then when the mote vanishes, it will grant that character temporary hit points equal to the value that was rolled on the inspiration die. And once again, this is going to require manual intervention on your part, and you're going to want to add a heal action in advance. You don't need to do anything except set this to be temporary and set up an empty value box, if you will, that you'll go through and make a modification to. Now, during a combat situation, if the ape goes through and has to make a saving throw after we apply bardic inspiration die to them, then what will happen here is that when they roll that saving throw, you will also see the total value of the die come up. In this case, it's a 1, so we're going to grant them a single temporary hit point. And that's it. That's all you have to do. Now, they had 5 in place, so the 1 didn't get applied. But if I clear that out and then apply that again, you'll see that they will be granted 1 temporary hit point. And while there's a little bit of manual intervention required whenever you're dealing with the mote of potential, at least the basics are now in place so that it should minimize the changes that you have to do during a combat scenario. You just have to pay attention as to what's going on. Also, at level 3, your character is going to gain access to the Performance of Creation feature, and it grants your character the means to create non magical items that happen to be of medium size or smaller and can be placed within 10 feet of your character's current location. The spot that the item is created on must be able to support it, but when that item is created, it will remain for a number of hours equal to your character's proficiency bonus, and at level 3, that's only going to be 2 hours. Whereas as your character levels up, it can be as much as 6 hours. To indicate that it's different, the item is going to shimmer a little bit softly. But when somebody touches it or chooses to wear it, they will hear a faint musical tone the entire time that they remain connected with that particular item. Yeah. And generally, the items that your character can create are those that are found within the equipment chapter of the player's handbook. But it's not necessarily always limited to that. In my opinion, whatever you can imagine can be created, but it still must fall within the medium or smaller size ranges at those earlier levels. And it must make sense, to be honest. Your character will only be able to create one item at a time, and it does not require any materials to be able to create it. However, there is a gold value limitation in that it can't be any more costly than 20 times your character's bard level. So at level 3, that would be a total of 60 gold pieces. And essentially what you would do is you would open up a character sheet from the player's handbook and gain access to the various quick link tables here, if you will, such as the weapons list or the armor list or whatever, and you would look for something that costs 60 gold pieces or less, and you should be able to go through and create it. Keep in mind, though, it's only going to last for a certain amount of time. The last limitation is that your character is only going to be able to use this feature once before they will be required to complete a long rest to regain any uses. However, you can expend a second level or higher spell slot to be able to use it once more without having to go through that rest period. But in the end, you're still going to require a rest to be able to both regain the expended uses of the feature as well as the expended spell slots that you used up to create additional items throughout the course of the day. And you do gain a size increase as your character levels up, such that at level 6, your character will now be able to create items that are of large size or smaller. And finally, at level 14, they will be able to create items of huge size or smaller. But this isn't something that you need to add to your actions tab from a actionable item perspective. You do need to add it to your actions tab to be able to track the number of uses. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up and then configure it for 1 daily use. Now, if I expend it, it goes away, and I'd have to actually go through the process of expending a spell slot of second level or higher in order to be able to make use of that feature again. And you'll see here that I've kind of advanced the character up through levels here just so I can burn through the rest of these features. At level 6, your character will unlock the Animating performance feature, and it will allow them to animate any object of size large or smaller for a period of 1 hour. And I should state that that item has to already be a non-magical item. It can't be a +1 sword, for example. You couldn't animate that and actually be able to make use of it. The item itself cannot have any other magic in it. Now, that 1 hour duration does have a couple of stipulations. If the item suffers damage to the point where it reaches 0 hit points, it will become inanimate and probably break up in the process. The other factor is that if your character dies while that item is still animated and still within the duration of that window, if you will, then it will also become inanimate. And if it had suffered any damage, it would probably have parts fall off at that particular point in time or look very, very badly damaged. The item itself is going to operate on the same initiative roll that your character does, but it will act independently and on its own during that turn, and its default action is going to be able to take the dodge action. However, you do have the option to command that item as a bonus action on your turn for it to do something else, such as attack something, but you will have to command it each time and each turn, otherwise it's just going to simply default back to the dodge action. As an added bonus, whenever you make use of the Bardic Inspiration feature, you can also make use of the command function of this particular inanimate item in that same bonus action. Unfortunately, however, there is no dancing item, if you will, already preloaded in an NPC sheet that you can gain access to. What has to happen is that when you tell the Dungeon Master that you're going to animate a particular item, they are going to have to create a character sheet, or NPC sheet, I should say, at the time that you specify that, and then share that over to you. And what they will do is they will pick up that item and drag it on top of your character's portrait that happens to be in the upper left portion of the fantasy ground screen. When they do that, it will drop into place and pop up on your screen and your screen alone. Now you'll notice that this indicator here is read only. That means that only the Dungeon Master is only going to be the one to be able to make changes to this particular NPC sheet. In addition, these are the default actions and traits that this particular item has, in addition to these features and what they might be immune to and stuff like that. They're going to have a random amount of hit points. Generally, it's going to be dictated by the size of the object. The larger the object, the heavier or higher the number of hit points it's going to have. And the armor class itself might also change a little bit. But the Dungeon Master is going to preset all of this up before they share this over to you. Although if they do make changes, it will automatically appear on your screen. Additionally, a Dungeon Master might go through the process of adding in additional actions depending on the type of item. A cabinet, for example, might gain a grab feature, or a grapple, I should say. Whereas a sword might happen to have damage capabilities that are different from what are here, like piercing damage, for example, as opposed to force damage. Things like that. There's going to be little differences that come into play. And that's going to be set up at the time that the item is shared over to you. Now, these things can be used during combat situations, so you can command them around to attack things, stuff like that. However, if your character becomes incapacitated while in combat, then what'll happen is that that item now gains the freedom to do any action it wants. Generally, the way it works is it will attack the first creature that happens to be near it that might not necessarily be an ally or an enemy of the character who animated it. It's entirely up to the DM, and generally they'll roll a decision die and make the decision based off of that. However, most DMs will be kind to the party and have it attack an enemy, and generally it will attack the enemy that happens to be attacking the creature that animated it. But not all DMs do that. There are some that are very, very evil when it comes to that particular animated item. And lastly, after your character has animated an item, they will need to complete a long rest to be able to make use of that particular feature again. However, they can expend a level 3 or higher spell slot if they want to be able to animate another item throughout the course of that particular day. Keep in mind, though, if they already have one animated item up and they go and animate a second item, then what's going to happen is that the first one will return to its inanimate state while the second one now becomes the animated item. And because there is a usage limitation here, we're going to drag and drop this into our character's actions tab so that we can set up the actual number of uses per day. And there we go. And that sets everything up for that. Now, the last feature that your character is going to gain is called Creative Crescendo, or Crescendo, depending on how you pronounce it. And it's going to happen at level 14. And what it does is it enhances your existing performance of creation features so that you can do other things. With this feature, your character will now be able to create multiple items at once, but the total number of items is going to be equal to your character's charisma modifier. So, for example, this particular character could create up to 4 items. However, there is a size limitation, and you can only create one item that is of the maximum size that your character can create, which at level 14 is huge. The rest of the items that your character creates have to be smaller in size. Additionally, there is no longer a gold limitation that comes into play, so the cost essentially disappears, giving you the ability to create as extravagant an item as you wish to actually go through and create. But keep in mind, it's only going to last for a number of hours equal to your proficiency bonus. In this case, it would be 5 hours for this character. Now, because the Creative Crescendo feature is linked directly to your Performance of Creation feature, you don't need to drag and drop this into your character's Actions tab. You just make use of it under the Performance of Creation category or feature set. So there's no need to add it anywhere. And that actually completes essentially all of the things that we need to worry about in relation to the subclass for this particular character. And the College of Creation definitely has a few interesting options, but as I've never seen one played or played one myself, I'm really not able to speak to their effectiveness, although they do seem quite competent and capable. But keep in mind that these features aren't the only features the character is going to gain. They are also going to gain all of the features that come through the base Bard class. and some of those are quite significant. So the overall effectiveness of the bard in general is only enhanced further by the features that are supplied by the subclass, which I still think is going to make it an interesting character to play. However, that does bring us to the end of this particular video, and I hope you found it useful and informative, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.
I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.